Okay, so previously we saw how we can add an event listener to the document and listen for DOM content loaded to wait until the DOM has been loaded so that we can interact with it, grab elements and add elements. Now, let's look at how we can add, this one is sort of a special one-time event that we use, but let's look at something more common like adding an event listener to a button that will fire once we click the button. So first, let's look at how we were doing it before. We were having something like a button. Oops. We had a button on our HTML. Let's call it click me. And then we were having something like an attribute here called onClick that we specified here, a function. Let's do alert user. So this button will fire this function once you click it. So let's create our function. In this case, I'm going to create it in outside of my callback for the DOM content loaded event listener. I'm just going to call it here function alert user, and then I'm going to do window that alert beware to the user. So let's see, this is sort of the old way. We're going to see the new way with add event listener. So let's look at this. We have the button on click is going to execute this function. This function is this function that we see here. Is going to alert the user. So let's go to our browser, refresh our page, and now let's click on the button click me. Boom, we get the function indeed was fired, the alert user function, and we see the pop-up appear, the alert. Okay. So again, this is how we could use, we could fire a function once you click on the button. But there's a more easier way in which we could use add event listener to add an event listener to the button that will fire this same function. So this is sort of just to demonstrate the old way in which we were doing it. Also, let's see if we find here, you could do, I'm going to right click in the button, inspect. I want to inspect the button. Here I have the button. And then here on the right, there is all these tabs. I want to see if here I can see that the onClick attribute has the alert user function in. I want to see this. And here I also see that this button has an event listener attached to it. This is useful to see what event listeners are attached to what things. You can see that, for instance, the P tag doesn't have a click. The H1 doesn't have a click. And because we had one that we created earlier, which is the DOM content loaded, that DOM content loaded is being listened for in the document object, right? Which everything is part of the document, so everything will be listening for that. Now in here, in the button, we see an extra one that we have, which is the click. And it even tells us what line of code, like the event listener, is coming from, index.html line 10. So if we go to index.html, we see line 10, we have that onClick alert user, which in turn will be this one. So this is, I just wanted to show you that because once we add the event listener, but not with the onClick attribute, but rather with the add event listener, we should still be able to see it popping up here. Okay, let's do it with add event listener now. So I'm going to remove this from here, remove the onClick. And then I want to just the same thing that I did with document add event listener. This is all the same format. Now, where do I want to listen for? I want to listen in the button, right? So let's try to do it. What happens if we try to grab the button here? Let button equal query selector button. What do we think if we do window.alert button? What are we going to see here? Let's say we have this. And then the alert function. If we try to do this outside of the callback to the add event listener for the DOM content loaded, what do you think we're going to see? Well, let's see. Let's refresh this page. And we have an error as we see this X here. Let's look at that. The reference error query selector is not defined. Oh, okay, this is my mistake. I should have not skipped document here. Now let's refresh, and we see no. This is this alert, the alert on line 8, saying that button here is null. Then again, why is it null? Because the script is in the head. The script will run first, and then the body will be interpreted, creating the DOM and adding all these elements to the DOM itself. And our script is not waiting for the DOM, or at least this part of our code is not waiting for the DOM to be loaded. It's therefore trying to grab a button, but the button is not there yet. Then the button ends up being null. So again, this is just to remind us that if we have code that is interacting with the DOM, we better have that code inside our callback to the DOM content loaded. So I'm going to move this from here. Let's just cut this, paste it in here. Now let's see the difference. I'm going to remove this console log H and header because we already saw those. And now let's refresh our page. I refresh the page. The DOM content loaded gets fired because the DOM was loaded, and then then that executes the callback. The callback is grabbing the button from the DOM and saving it to a button variable, then alerting the button, which just says, instead of null, now it says object HTML button elements. The important thing here is that we have the button already, which is great. Now, once we have the button, what we want is to add an event listener to it. So first, let's look at the button here again. Right-click, inspect, expand this. Now we have the button, and here on the right, I'm going to go to event listeners. Now look at here that we don't have an event listener other than the DOM content loaded in our website, and specifically the button doesn't have any other event listener. We're gonna see what happens once we add one. So that's that. Instead of alerting, I want to add an event listener to the button. So here is what do I want to add the event listener to? The button. And then we do add event listener, the method. And then here we have here just the same format. Now here I want to pass in the event name that I want to listen for. In this case, I want to listen for the click event. And then here, the second argument, again, just like in this case, the second argument is going to be a function, going to be a callback function. In this case, instead of defining the function in the arguments, just like I did here by doing the fat arrow, I have this function that I define outside. I'm just going to use that one. So I'm just going to pass in the alert function, the alert user function to my add event listener. So know what we're doing here. All this inside all this is inside the dump content loaded. We are grabbing the button, we save it to a button variable, and then we add an event listener that will listen for the click event, and it's going to invoke this function once the click event happens. Note here that when we were doing this on HTML, we had to do onClick as the attribute in the button here. Once we are doing it through the add event listener, we can get rid of the on, and we just say click. In fact, if you do onClick, it's not going to work because that's just not the way in which we can correctly add events, event listener to our elements. And here we drop the on. We just listen for the click event. So again, this is grabbing the button and then adding an event listener to it for the click event. Is going to fire the alert user function once the click event happens in the button. So let me expand this. And let's refresh this page. Refresh this page, I'm going to right click in the button, inspect, and now if I go to the event listeners tab in here, while having the button selected and on the left, now on the right, I have that the button has the dump content loaded, and also it has a click event listener, and that is going to be an index.js line 9. And as we can see, the index.js line 9 is our function, the function that will fire once the click event happens. Now let's look at that happening. Now I'm refreshing here, I'm clicking the button, and we have our alert displaying. So this is adding the event listener for the click event on the button, and what we want to do with that. In this case, just call the alert user function. So this is if I define the function outside, I could do this. Or if I wanted ES6 anonymous function defining the argument itself, I could just do this window.alert beware or any other message, and then I wouldn't need this. In this way, instead of defining the callback out somewhere else and just passing in the name of the callback, I define it right here in the arguments, and this will work exactly the same. Cool. Let's see what else do I have here. Okay, so an exercise that we did yesterday was add an event listener to this paragraph so that when you hover over it, it displays an alert or it does something. Let's do that one. So we added the event listener to the button. That's great. Now we want to add an event listener to the paragraph, and we want that event listener to be in the lookout for once the user hovers over the paragraph. And once he hovers, then let's display an alert. So again, here is the same format. First, where do you want to listen to? Or to what element do you want to listen to? What element do you want to sort of attach the event listener to? In this case, I want to attach the event listener to the paragraphs. So the first step is grab the paragraph. P document query selector. I'm going to give here, I could just use query selector P because I only have one. Remember that if you have more than one paragraph, then query selector will only grab you the first one. You could get around that by giving this paragraph an ID and therefore grabbing it with the ID. I'm just going to do it like that here, P, and then the next thing that I want to do is I want to add the event listener to the paragraph. So I'll just do p.add event listener. Here, the same format, the name of the event that I want to listen for. And here, I don't remember how to listen for hover. So let's just do a Google search. This is actually in the lecture notes. Has exactly this name, but let's imagine we don't know the name. We just want to find out. So let's do hover over element event JavaScript. And then we get the first result that we have is the on mouse over event. Let's look at this. Execute a JavaScript when moving the mouse pointer onto an image. In this case, they have the image tag, and then they have sort of the all way, which is on mouse over, on mouse over the attribute, and then they call this function. So one thing, we're not going to be doing it like this. We are going to be adding it, instead of attributing the tag, adding the event listener with that add event listener, the method. One thing that we learned from here is that there is this event, mouse over event. Let's see if we find somewhere else this one, element mouse over event. Here, the mouse over event is fired at an element when a pointing device, such a mouse or a trackpad, is used to move the cursor onto the element or one of its child elements. Okay, this seems like that's the thing that we need. The following example illustrates the difference between mouse over and mouse enter events. So there seems to be two different events, mouse over and mouse enter. So in this case, let's experiment with mouse over. So let's go to our code. Open up this one here, which is what we have been doing. Here, since we read that the mouse over is sort of will be fired once the mouse gets over an element or is hovering over an element, let's just use that one, mouse over. Also, if you remember in this list that I had shown you here, which is this URL, here we should also be able to find, in here we have mouse over. Command F, mouse over, we find it there. Pointing device is moved into an element that has the listener attached or onto one of its children. So let's go back here. Now going back to our p tag, we grab the p tag. Now we want to add the event listener that will listen for the mouse over event. And then here, what do we want to do once that event happens? We're defining a callback in the arguments, an ES6 anonymous callback. What I want to happen is to do a window.alert that says you hover over a p tag. You hover over a p tag. So this is add event listener list to p tag on mouse over. This is what we're doing here. We're grabbing the element, add an event listener for the mouse over event, and then once that happens, this callback gets executed. So let's try it out. Let's refresh the page. Now let's look at what happens once I hover over the p tag. Boom, I didn't even have to click. You hover over a p tag. Here I'm hovering over the H1. The event is happening under the hood. A mouse over event is being fired in the H1, but we don't have an event listener there, therefore nothing happens. Now once the mouse over event happens in the p tag, we have an event listener there, specifically listen for that event, and it fires, and what it's doing is just alerting you hover over the p tag. And it can get really annoying because even if I get really fast over the p tag, it will still fire. Even have to sort of go outside, and then let's hover over coming from the bottom. There you go. From the back, there you go. Outside, there. We are hovering. We are using the add event listener in this case on the p tag. So this is just to say two things. One is you can add event listeners to any element, any kind of element, paragraphs, anything that you can imagine. And you will do that by calling the add event listener on the element that you want to add it to. The second thing is there are a ton of events that are happening that you can listen for. Mouse over and click are just some of them. We are actually not gonna get to cover most of them because there's just too many. I just invite you to read about them in here, find some interesting ones that you feel like you could use in your applications, and then do that. Okay, I think this is it for now. The next thing that we're going to learn is, oh, actually, wait. Before we do that, we are going to see what happens. An argument that gets passed to the callback function. So it turns out that let's see. Let's go back here. Oh. I'm going to just remove that event listener on the paragraph. But just like here, we're firing in an alert. We could do any other action, like just color this paragraph a different color, or make this paragraph text a little bit larger, something like that. But even remove. Oh, that will be an interesting one. Let's actually see that one. Instead of removing, let's do when you hover over it, it will hide the paragraph. When you go outside of it, would it unhide it? Oh, that's an interesting question. I think it wouldn't. Let's look at that one. Mouse over, instead of alerting, what I want to do is p. I'm not sure if you guys remember, but once we were inspecting, let's do console.dir the p tag. So I wanna see the p tag inside. So I hover over it, refresh this page, then hover over it, and then I see it. You can see that it will, as many times as I hover, I get console.dir. But then let's look at one of these. You may recall that this is just an object that represents the p tag. It has a bunch of properties, and one of them was the hidden property. Let's see where. The hidden property. If this is set to true, then the element is hidden. Otherwise, the element is back put to. So if it's true, the element is hidden. Otherwise, the element is visible. So what I want to see is if we can hide the element once I hover over it. So we'll do that by doing p.hiddenProperty equal to true. Now let's look at that. Refresh the page. I'm going to hover over .p tag. Boom, it just disappeared, and it will not appear back because, well, it's hidden, and then now I cannot hover over it anymore because, well, it's not there anymore. But that is something also that you could have as well. Just another example as to in here in our callback to the add event listener, we could just do anything, including hiding the paragraph if that's what we wanted to. Okay, so I wanted to show you the fact that in here to this callback, in the add event listener, we receive an argument here called the event. So that's right. Add event listener. Once this event happens in the p tag, add event listener will pass in the event itself, the event that happened to our callback. Then this event is an object that represents the event that happened. It has information as to like where the event happened, maybe even who caused the event, and at what time probably. So let's take a look at that. So far we haven't been looking at the event, but now that's sort of like our next step. So here, instead of hiding the paragraph, I'm just going to console log the paragraph, or console.dir the paragraph. But more importantly, actually, let's just console log. Let's do something like this: console.log you hover over the p tag. Right? And also let's inspect the event. Let's poke at it inside. Let's peek at it inside. Event console.dir event. Now let's see. Go back to the browser, refresh the page. Now hover over the p tag, and we have you hover over the p tag. That's the first console log, and the next is the console log console.dir mouse event. Now let's inspect this. As I said, this mouse event is just an object with a bunch of properties. Now look at all the properties that this object has. All key, false, bubbles, true, control key from element, is trusted, movement X and Y, layer X and Y, offset page X and Y. This one seems to be the coordinates where the event happened. So maybe if I hover over the p tag, like over here, if I hover over the p tag here, this is a different coordinate that if I hover over the p tag here. I would imagine. Let's look at see if those changes. Let's do page X 151, page Y 957 or 197. Let's look at one of the previous one. 151. Boom, we have different ones. So the Y is the same one because the Y will be the Y axis, so the vertical axis. So this p tag is like in pixel 97, and then the Y, the X is the horizontal axis. So the X will change depending on where I hover as well. Let's look at some other properties. Mouse event. Let's go. And look at this, for instance. It says the type of the event. The type of the event was a mouse over. Oh, look, it even has the timestamp. This is a number that somehow represents what time the event happened. Not sure how we could interpret that, but it will be interesting, just like good to note that we can know when the event happened as well. Here, so again, this is an object that represents the event. This is this guy here. Add event listener will pass in the event to your callback. And here, there are some interesting ones. We saw the X and Y, but one that is really useful is this target. The event has a target property, and this target property is where the event happened, basically, like the target of the event. So here I targeted this p tag. Therefore, I targeted this p tag with my mouse, and then therefore the event that target is the p tag itself. Look at it. Even when I hover over here, the p tag is highlighted there. And then this is a reference to the p tag itself. So we can see, for instance, the p tag has a property called inner text. This inner text is the inner text of the p tag. So that is a good one. With the event, you get what is called as a reference to the target in the event. So the event has a target property. Let's refresh this. That when I'm going to console.dir, the event.target, and now I see, oops, oh, I didn't save my JS file. Save this, refresh. Now when I hover over here, I see who was the target of the event. The target of the event was P, right? And the P is the P tag itself. So here, note also that we can do something like this. The P tag that we have here, this one, console.log P triple equal event.target. This is sort of to just demonstrate that this event target here will contain the P tag itself, because that's where the event happened. So we should get true in here in this line. Let's see. True. See, true, because the event target is the P tag itself. So we can say p, which is this one, the p tag itself, is it equal to the event target? Then true, because they are exactly the same. So that's that. What else do we have in the, that's good to have the event here. We're gonna see, once we see the submit, how this event is also even more helpful as well. So as the only thing you need to remember here is your callback to the event listener, to the add event listener, will be passing an event. Or in other words, add event listener will pass in the event that occurred to your callback function, so that you can know where the event happened, who was the target, and other information like that. Okay, now next we're going to see the submit event on a form. Thank you.